Hello, good morning. Welcome to the next session. This session will be a bit different from the others because we are not going to talk about EU funding directly, but about state aid control, and state aid is something that the member states are granting, but the European Commission has a role to play in scrutinizing how this funding is channeled. So today in this session you will learn a bit how state aid control works, what it is, and also one example of such type of authorized state aid, which are IPCIs, which is an acronym standing for Important Project of Common European Interest. And you will see how this type of state aid can stimulate partnerships and how it is funded and the funding opportunities it is presenting. So, except that I don't know how the slides are moving. This one. Okay, sorry. I found it. So first, what is state aid control? Why do we even have state aid control? Because state aid control, depending on whether you are on the receiving end of the money, you will see it more as an obstacle to the last obstacle before you receive the money from the state. Or on the contrary, if you are more the competitor, you will see it as an important fence around financial opportunities by member states. So just very briefly, what is state aid and how is it a bit different from EU funding? State aid is also about financial support, but this time granted by a member state. So it's about financial resources that are under the control of a member state and that the member state grants to a specific company or a group of companies. So also the characteristic of state aid is that it is granted to some companies at the expense of others. And because of that, it can distort competition between companies in the internal market. Because of this potential distortion of competition, it is then also subject to a certain scrutiny, and it is part of competition policy. Competition policy, for which the European Commission is responsible, has different legs. One leg is merger control, where you make sure that the market does not become too much concentrated to rip out competition. The second leg is antitrust. That's more verifying that companies behave fairly on the market. And then you have state aid control, which is more verifying what the member states are doing and making sure that they are not heavily subsidizing a company so as to distort competition. So competition policy is about maintaining the level playing field, maintaining fair competition. State aid is normally prohibited, or at least that's the starting point. So the starting point is that normally member states are not supposed to subsidize their companies. However, there are exceptions to that, because I'm sure that if I were to ask you, can you not imagine a situation where perhaps a subsidy would make sense? I'm sure you would come up with quite many examples. Typically, you would think about incentives for environmental protection, or incentive to stimulate innovation, research, or cohesion. And therefore, state aid can be authorized under certain conditions. So in a way, you have bad aid, very distortive, not yielding anything, any added value, and you have good aid. And the role of the European Commission is to sort out bad aid from good aid, to authorize the good aid, and to prohibit the bad aid. So when bad aid is granted, normally, first the Commission would say, no, this aid cannot be granted. And if it has already been paid out, the company's competitors can complain, first of all. And then there would be an investigation, and the Commission would then, in the end, ask that the aid is paid back to the member states. So this is recovery. And I wanted to explain to you a bit more about IPCIs, which is one type of authorized aid, one type of good aid. And it's a bit of a very specific animal because it is about projects with many different companies cooperating with the same aim. So it's also a collaborative type of aid. So IPCIs is an acronym. Sometimes it's also called IPCAs. It is an important project of common European interest. That's what this IPCI stands for. As I said, it is a type of aid that member states can grant. So this is about funding from member states. And because it's the member state funding this, they are also at the starting point of an IPCI. So they are the ones initiating such an IPCI. Nevertheless, the IPCI, and that's where you have this common European interest in the word, is about projects that will achieve an objective that fits into the EU strategies, the EU objectives, things that we believe are in the common European interest. And you have a few examples of those strategies. You will find back the Green Deal, environmental protection, climate protection, but also the digital agenda, digital strategy, strategy for data, next generation EU, the recovery, but also European Health Union and industrial policy, and many more. But I think you get the idea. This is about common European interest. Going more into the specifics about what an IPCI really is and how it works. This is a cross-border project, and it has to involve at least 4 member states, which means that you have several member states coming together. They have a common objective in mind. They want to stimulate the same type of project, and they would then initiate this. This is also about normally integration. You have 2 types of IPCIs. That's true. You can have a single project that is cross-border, or you have an integrated IPCI, which is then a bigger project but made of different sub-projects from different companies that will come together to have a common goal. I told you already this is about achieving in the end something that is fitting into an EU objective. The projects themselves that are making this IPCI, they will be about research, first industrial deployment, or infrastructure. And I will come in a moment to what exactly this research should be about, or first industrial deployment, what it means. One very important requirement about this IPCI, and the reason why the aid in the end can be seen as very positive, is that the project needs to deliver positive spillovers. And this is something that the Commission will also verify, the potential for the positive spillovers, meaning that the project in the end also brings added value, not just to the beneficiaries of the aid, but also to the economy at large. Also, you cannot just have it like that because the member state would have decided that it's nice to give money for something. The starting point is also always to verify that you cannot achieve the objective without support. So it's also about market failures. It's about areas in which the companies, by the market forces alone, would not invest into this because it's too expensive, too risky, etc. There are also 2 other conditions. This needs to comply with the do no significant harm principle. So in the end, your project should not lead to important harm to the environment. And the beneficiaries still need to bring something into the project. It cannot be that it is entirely financed by public money. So there is also a contribution still by the beneficiary, which is there to show that the beneficiary is still believing in his project. So I mentioned 3 types of project can fit into an IPCI. The first type is research project. And here we are talking about ambitious research, so bringing major innovation. You think that your project will be a breakthrough innovation, or at least a major innovation. And this will also be examined by the Commission, by a technical expert, verifying the technical logs you are trying to to break and go through. First industrial deployment is then a bit the next step. Once you have your research done, you have a product or service, you envisage to go to the market. And there is a step just before mass production, which is, well, what we call first industrial deployment, where you need to scale up to still have your teasing to clarify. You still have things to clarify, verify, correct. So that's the first industrial deployment. And then the last category are infrastructure, but key infrastructure projects. So this is a bit different from the research angle. So this type of projects, they can fit into an IPCI. This is just an overview of the IPCIs that have been authorized so far by the Commission, at least the integrated ones. You see that there were 2 on microelectronics, 2 on batteries, 3 on hydrogen, and 1 on cloud. Then you see the member states that participated. You see the flags. And behind the flags, you have companies. And the companies, you see then in the second row, the number of companies that participated in each IPCI. And you see, for instance, the second microelectronics, one of the biggest one, with 56 companies participating. So those are really already quite big collaborative projects. And then perhaps one interesting row is the state aid approved under each IPCI. And the biggest one is, again, the second microelectronic IPCI with 8.1 billion of aid authorized. Perhaps to go a bit even deeper into what it means for business, for the companies, and the different companies. So whether you are in this collaborative project or whether you are not. So what does it mean for you? First, let's go to the ones that are really participating in this IPCI, the direct participants. I mentioned to you that there are 2 types of IPCIs, and the most popular one is this integrated IPCI. And one thing that you need to verify is whether it's really integrated. So as this is about collaborations, the companies need to have complementary projects. They have a common objective, a common roadmap. They fit into a common structure. But how does this happen? Because it doesn't happen just like that. I mentioned it starts with the member states being aware that there is a need to stimulate a certain innovation in an area, or they believe that there is a need to have common infrastructure into another one. They will then decide together that they want to do something together and find the companies that would be willing to engage into this. Based on that, they will organize national calls. They will have calls for projects. And that's where then the companies will see the objective that the member states are pursuing together and the type of projects that are being sought. They will then apply to those calls. The member states generally then make a first pre-selection of projects that seem particularly fitting into the global objective. And they will organize what is called matchmaking events. Those matchmaking events, they will bring together the companies, not just of one member state, but of all the member states together. And they will see whether what they have in mind could fit with what someone else had in mind, and whether they are complementary, whether they can find partners, basically. This takes a certain amount of time to come together. Often there are several matchmaking events where the different companies can exchange about what they would envisage to do, the type of partners that they would need in order to carry on the project. And also, as I mentioned, as it brings the member states all together and the companies from all the member states together, you will, in the end, also have cross-border collaborations. Once this is done, you start to prepare more the state aid file, and then it goes to the commission for scrutiny. One thing I wanted to add still about this partnership between the direct partners is that often it takes a value chain approach, so you will not have companies that are doing all the same, but they are complementary to each other across the value chain. And also SMEs are more than welcome, and they're making a big part of the participants in those IPCIs. The second thing for the direct partners is also the funding. So this comes from the member state. As I said, very often when the member states start to seriously embark on an IPCI, they will also start to think about the means that they can put into that, and so the stated budget that they would allocate to the IPCI. Under the IPCI rules, a member state can give for a specific individual project a certain amount of aid that may not exceed, but can go up to the eligible cost and the funding gap. Put together is the lowest of the two. The eligible costs are then the cost of the research and the first industrial deployment, be it depreciation of CapEx or then operating costs that you incur during your research or your first industrial deployment. And for an infrastructure, those are simply the CapEx of the infrastructure itself and the operating costs during the construction. The funding gap, again another jargon, is simply the cost and revenues of a given project over its lifetime, discounted. It's the net present value of your project. And this one is normally negative, which is also the sign that you need public funding to go on, because you know that your costs actually exceed the revenue that you can expect. I mentioned that an IPCI is normally, this is about state aid, so it's the member state funding them, but you can also have co-funding. So it happens that for a given project, you have in the end member state funding and also EU funding. For instance, under the Resilience and Recovery Facility, so the RRP, very often you have projects that were included in an IPCI also co-funded from that, or from the Innovation Fund or Horizon Europe, so you can have a co-funding. Also, to make this a bit more concrete, perhaps, an example taken from the first battery IPCI. So you see, in this one, 7 member states participated with these companies, 17, but with sub-projects, so in total 22. With a total amount of aid authorized of 3.2 billion. And you see that this is a value chain. So you do not just have the battery as such, but you also have then the raw materials, the advanced materials that you need in the battery. And then even the battery itself is composed of different things, where you have the cells and then also the battery system. And you see that you have then different companies that are then developing, improving the raw material that goes into the cell and the module, and other companies that are improving the system that is commanding the cell and the module. And then finally, you have the repurposing and recycling. Again, this is something that is then more depending on the raw material you use, because you need to know which type of purity in the end you want to achieve for the battery if you want to be able to recycle it. And this also gives you perhaps an idea of the type of collaborations you can have. Because, of course, well, I don't know whether it's obvious, but the collaborations will be across this value chain. The raw material, they develop a specific material that is fitting into the specifications of the cell developer, because in the end they want to have batteries that are more autonomous. You can drive longer without needing to recharge. And this requires an improvement of the battery, the cell, the module, the system, but often also the raw material itself. And there you will then have collaborations across those 3 first levels of the value chain. And then I mentioned it already a bit, the recyclers, they will directly collaborate with the raw and advanced materials in order to understand better what is needed in terms of recycling to have a purer raw material. Because at least at the moment that this started, the recycling was not very advanced. You could recover part of the battery, but not to a level of purity that you would be able to reuse for a battery. And there, they wanted to make the research in order to be able to recycle it to a much higher level of purity. So I mentioned the direct participants, but actually an IPCI can have an impact beyond the direct participants. And this is what is referred to as the ecosystem of an IPCI. And this comes to one requirement that I mentioned to you at the very beginning, these spillovers. And the spillovers, they come because, first, a research generally requires not just the involvement of the direct participant with his research project, but often they have a lot of partners in order to carry out this research. And those partners, they are indirectly involved. It will also stimulate their activity, but they are not at the core of the IPCI. They are not the ones that are aided, but they will also indirectly benefit from it, from the research itself, from the knowledge acquired, and then also it stimulates, for instance, can lead to subcontracting or the commercial partners. They have then also an additional commercial activity. Some of the indirect partners can also be aided, then often under other state aid rules. For instance, the block exemption regulation, which is about smaller amounts of aid. And here another illustration, which is the IPCI on cloud, where you see the direct participants and the indirect partners. And you see that the indirect partners are even more numerous than the direct participants. And then what about all the others? Because even all the others, they have an interest or they can be impacted differently by an IPCI. Still about the spillovers, because the spillovers, this added value that we bring to the economy really has to go beyond the direct participants, the beneficiaries of the aid, but also even the member states participating. This comes from the dissemination, actually. So we have been talking about research projects, innovation, and there is a requirement coming with that is that the result of your research, they need to be disseminated in workshops, in publications, so that it can also be used potentially in other sectors, stimulating other further innovations. Of course, you still have the IP protection that is there, so you do not need to renounce to your IP rights, but then it comes with a licensing at fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory conditions. For infrastructure, there the spillovers come from the fact that the infrastructure will need to be open access. You will have to give access to this infrastructure to third parties, not just the ones that participated in the IPCI, but also third parties. And then perhaps one last element to mention on this, on precisely third parties, competitors, other companies, is that all of this has gone through state aid control. The Commission has verified that there is this potential for spillovers, that there is a market failure, and that there is a need for aid. And the Commission will also scrutinize the level of aid that is granted to make sure that aid is needed and limited strictly to what is needed to carry out the project, so that there are no windfall profits. So with that, I will try to recap what I have been talking about the last 20 minutes. The IPCIs, important product of common European interest. This is about, in this case, inclusiveness, as I mentioned, perhaps not so much at the beginning, but all the member states must be given a chance to participate in an IPCI, but then also all companies. This comes then through the national calls that they organize. SMEs have their place and role to play, particular, they are driving a lot the innovation. An IPCI, because of the requirement or the nature of it, is really about creating collaborations and partnerships. So this is stimulating it through these matchmaking events. It goes with funding. This is about state aid. And because of the type of project it is about, it will trigger or help to develop key infrastructure, key technologies, breakthrough innovation, which in itself normally, because it fits together, delivers positive spillovers also for the economy at large. And all of this comes with the safeguards that I mentioned, which come from the state aid control. You can be sure that the aid is needed and limited to the minimum. So this actually was the end of my presentation. I thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions, I will be available here for one-to-one discussions. Many thanks.